The airport was full of noise, movement, and rushing footsteps. Families laughed together, children pulled at their parents' hands, and business travelers walked quickly with phones pressed to their ears. In the middle of this busy scene, one man sat quietly, almost invisible to the crowd. His name was Adil. Adil was not an ordinary man. People knew his name from newspapers and business magazines. He had once been a powerful CEO, running a company that shaped the future of technology. His face used to appear in interviews, his speeches were shared online, and his decisions influenced thousands of lives. But at that moment, in the corner of the airport near a large glass window, Adil did not look like a leader. He looked like a man who had lost the warmth of life. He sat in a wheelchair, his body still but his eyes alive with a quiet storm. Months ago, a sudden accident had changed everything. Before the accident, Adil had been full of energy. He had traveled to meetings in different countries, walked confidently into boardrooms, and carried himself with the pride of someone who controlled his destiny. But the accident left him paralyzed from the waist down. The man who once stood tall now relied on wheels to move. The hardest part was not the chair, but the silence that followed. Friends stopped calling as often. Business partners kept their distance, focusing on his company more than on him. Even his own family did not stay close for long. They cared, yes, but their lives kept moving forward. Adil often felt like he had been left behind while the rest of the world raced ahead. At the airport, this feeling grew stronger. He had arrived hours earlier for his flight, not because he needed to, but because he had nowhere else to be. The large glass window gave him a view of airplanes landing and leaving. Each one seemed to carry people with hope, excitement, and purpose. He wondered when he had last felt that way. People passed by him quickly. Some looked at him for a brief second, then turned their eyes away. Others walked as if he were not even there. A few whispered softly, recognizing his face from the past, but no one stopped. To them, he was either a memory of power or simply a man in a wheelchair. Adil adjusted his jacket and tried to keep his expression calm. He had practiced this mask for months, showing strength even when his heart felt heavy. But behind the mask, loneliness weighed on him. He thought about the dinners he used to share with colleagues, the events where people surrounded him, the meetings where his voice carried authority. Now, the only sound around him was the rolling of suitcases and the echo of announcements calling flights. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out, hoping for a message from someone close. It was only a reminder about an upcoming company meeting he no longer needed to attend. He sighed and put it back. For a moment, Adil closed his eyes. The noise of the airport blended into a blur. He tried to remember the day before the accident. He remembered sunlight on his office window, a meeting full of plans, a phone call from his younger sister asking if he would join a family dinner. He had been too busy then, promising he would come next time. Now, he had all the time in the world, but people had learned to stop waiting for him. A family walked by, their laughter cutting through his thoughts. A little girl skipped beside her parents, holding a small toy plane in her hand. She giggled loudly as if the whole airport belonged to her happiness. Adil felt a faint smile tug at his lips. Children had a way of carrying joy without effort. For a second, he wondered what it would feel like to laugh so freely again. But the smile faded. The girl kept walking, and once again, Adil was left with silence. The weight of loneliness pressed harder. He told himself it was fine, that he could survive this. After all, he had survived harder things in business. But deep inside, a voice whispered that surviving was not the same as living. The minutes stretched slowly. Each tick of the clock reminded him how empty his world had become. To strangers, he looked like a rich man sitting alone, maybe waiting for his flight. But inside, he was waiting for something much deeper, someone to remind him that he still belonged to the world, that he was more than his wheelchair, more than his losses. And so, As the crowd moved endlessly around him, Adil sat quietly by the glass window, unseen and unheard. The world did not know that behind his silent figure was a man with a heart longing to be touched again. What Adil did not know, however, was that fate was already moving in his direction. In the same airport, among the thousands of travelers, a small voice would soon notice him. A child's innocent question, spoken to his mother, would break the silence that had covered Adil's world for so long. The airport was a place of rushing footsteps, rolling suitcases, and hurried voices, but in the middle of all the noise, Myra walked with calm determination. She was not a woman of wealth or fame, but she carried strength in her steps. With one hand, she held her small bag tightly, and with the other, she guided her young son, Samir, who skipped beside her with curious eyes. Myra was a single mother. Life had not been easy for her, but she had learned to keep moving forward. She worked long hours, often sacrificing her own needs to give Samir the little joys he deserved. Today, she was traveling for something important, a chance at a better future. She didn't know exactly what awaited her, but she carried hope like a shield against her fears. Samir was only 6 years old, yet his eyes carried more wonder than worry. Every corner of the airport was a new adventure for him. He tugged at Myra's hand, pointing at the huge glass windows, the glowing signs, and the endless lines of people. His small voice filled the air with questions. Mama, why are the airplanes so big? Mama, do they really fly above the clouds? Mama, why is that man walking so fast? Myra smiled softly, answering with patience. His questions reminded her that even though the world was heavy for her, it could still be full of magic for him. As they passed through the busy hall, Samir's curious eyes landed on someone different. Near the corner, close to the glass window, sat a man in a wheelchair. He looked well dressed, his posture straight, but there was something about his face, something quiet and lonely. Unlike the rushing travelers, he did not look like he was in a hurry. He just sat there, his gaze fixed outside the window, as if the airplanes were carrying pieces of his heart away. Samir slowed his steps, pulling at Myra's hand. Mama, he whispered, why is he all alone? Myra followed her son's gaze. She saw the man in the wheelchair and felt a pause in her heart. There was something in his expression, a mixture of strength and sadness, that made her chest tighten. She could have pulled her son along, told him not to stare, and kept walking. That would have been easier. People often avoided strangers, especially those who looked like they carried heavy stories. But Myra was not like most people. She had known what it felt like to be ignored, to sit alone in a crowd and wish someone would notice her. She remembered nights when she had no one to share her worries with, except her little boy. And now, seeing that man alone, she felt something stir inside her. Maybe he is waiting for someone, Myra whispered back. But Samir didn't look convinced. His young eyes were too honest, too innocent to accept easy answers. They walked a little further, but Samir tugged at her hand again. Mama, we should talk to him. He looks sad. Myra hesitated. It wasn't easy to approach strangers, especially someone who looked so private. She wondered if he would even want company. But then she thought about all the times she had wished someone would reach out to her. Sometimes a single word, a single smile, could change an entire day. Taking a breath, Myra nodded gently. All right, just for a moment, she said. Together, they turned and walked back toward the man. Myra noticed the way people around him walked quickly past, as if his silence created an invisible wall. But Samir didn't feel that wall at all. He walked right up to the wheelchair, his little hand still in his mother's, and looked up with curious eyes. Hello, Samir said softly, his voice carrying more warmth than many adults could give. The man, Adil, turned his head slowly. His eyes met the child's, and for a second, surprise flickered across his face. He had not expected anyone, especially a child, to stop for him. Myra spoke gently. "Good afternoon. I hope you don't mind. My son, he was wondering why you were sitting alone." Her words were careful, kind, not pitying. She didn't look at him as if he was less, she looked at him as if he was human. That small difference mattered more than she could know. Adil blinked, unsure how to respond. For months, people had either avoided him or spoken to him with forced politeness. This was different. This was genuine. He cleared his throat and replied quietly, "I'm just waiting for my flight." Samir tilted his head. "All by yourself?" Adil almost smiled at the child's honesty. "Yes, all by myself." The boy frowned, then said with a simple certainty, "Then we can sit with you. You won't be alone." Myra looked at her son, startled by his boldness, but before she could gently stop him, Adil let out a sound he hadn't made in a long time, a small, soft laugh. It was faint, almost uncertain, but it was real. Myra's heart softened. She could see it in the man's eyes. Behind his strong appearance was a soul quietly aching for connection. She knew then that her son's innocent question had touched something deeper than she could have planned. As they sat near him, the noise of the airport seemed to fade a little. 3 strangers, 1 man, 1 mother, and 1 child had crossed the invisible wall of silence. None of them knew how much this small meeting would change the days to come. Adil had not planned to speak to anyone that day. He had imagined sitting in silence until it was time for his flight, then boarding quietly, unnoticed by the crowd. Yet now, he found himself facing a boy with bright eyes and a mother with a gentle smile. For a moment, Adil hesitated. His instinct was to stay guarded, to keep conversations short, because talking often led to questions he didn't want to answer. But the boy's honesty disarmed him. There was no pity in Samir's voice, no careful hesitation like adults usually showed. There was only simple curiosity. "So, what are you looking at?" Samir asked, pointing at the wide glass window. Adil followed the boy's finger and replied softly, "The airplanes." Samir's eyes lit up. "Do you like airplanes?" Adil paused, then gave a small nod. "I used to fly often. For work. Many times a month." The boy's mouth opened in awe. "Really? That means you've been on more planes than me and Mama." Myra smiled faintly, watching her son's excitement. She could see Adil's stiff expression begin to soften. His voice, though quiet, carried a depth that revealed how much he had seen and done. Samir leaned closer, as if sharing a secret. "I've never been on a big plane before. This is my first time. Are you scared when it takes off?" Adil's lips curved slightly. "At first, yes. But then, you get used to it. The moment the plane rises, and the ground falls away, it feels like freedom." As soon as he said the word freedom, his voice slowed. A shadow crossed his face. To him, freedom now seemed like a memory that belonged to someone else. Myra noticed the change, and her heart tightened, but she did not press him with questions. Instead, she shifted the mood gently. "My son has been asking questions since we walked into the airport," Myra said with a light laugh. "I think he has enough curiosity for 10 children. Samir grinned, proud of himself. "Mama says asking questions makes me smart." "It does," Adil said quietly, surprising himself. He had not given encouragement to anyone in months, yet the words came naturally. Curiosity means you want to learn. And people who keep learning, they can go far. Samir beamed at the praise. He pulled out his toy car from his pocket and began rolling it along the armrest of Adil's wheelchair. "This car is fast too. But I think planes are faster. Don't you?" Adil watched the small car move back and forth, and something inside him shifted. The boy did not look at the wheelchair with confusion or pity. He treated it as part of the moment, a surface for his game, nothing more. That small innocence touched Adil in ways he couldn't explain. Myra noticed the way Adil's eyes softened as he looked at her son. She decided to join the conversation, her tone respectful but open. If you traveled so much, then you must have seen many places. Which one did you like the most? Adil's gaze drifted toward the window again. He thought for a while before answering. I liked Istanbul in the spring. The streets were full of flowers, and the air was fresh. And Paris, at night, the lights made the whole city glow. But my favorite was always the small towns no one wrote about. The quiet ones, where people smiled at you just because you passed by. As he spoke, Myra listened carefully. There was a softness in his words, like someone remembering not just places but moments of belonging. You must miss traveling, Myra said gently. The words struck deeper than she realized. Adil's hand tightened on the armrest of his wheelchair. For a moment, he wanted to close the conversation, to retreat behind silence. But something about Myra's voice stopped him. It was not pity. It was understanding, the kind of understanding that comes from someone who has also lost things they once held dear. Yes, Adil admitted at last, his voice low. I miss it every day. A quiet pause settled between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where hearts understood each other without needing too many words. Samir, too young to feel the heaviness, filled the space with his bright voice. Mama says when we get to our new city, I can see the ocean. Have you seen the ocean, Uncle? Adil nodded, his lips curving slightly. Yes. It's endless. When you stand on the shore, it feels like the world is so big, and your problems are so small. Myra glanced at him, her eyes thoughtful. She wondered what kind of storms this man had faced, storms that made him sit in the corner of an airport with loneliness written on his face. Samir placed his toy car on Adil's knee as if offering it. You can hold it if you want. Adil looked at the little car resting on his lap. It was such a small gesture, yet it made his chest tighten. He placed his hand gently over it and whispered, "Thank you." Myra saw something change in that moment. The guarded man who looked unreachable was slowly opening, not through grand gestures, but through the simple kindness of a child and the patience of a stranger. As the announcement for delayed flights echoed through the hall, Adil realized the time with them might stretch longer than expected. Instead of feeling annoyed at the delay, he felt something he had not felt in a long time: relief. For the first time in months, he was not completely alone. And so, the unlikely conversation continued: light words from a boy, gentle questions from a mother, and careful answers from a man who was slowly remembering what it felt like to be human again. The delay in flight stretched on, and what could have been a tiresome wait became something different for Adil. He had not planned to spend his hours in conversation, yet there he was, listening to a young boy's endless questions and a mother's gentle laughter. For a man who had spent months locked in silence, the change was almost startling. Samir continued to play near his chair, running his small toy car across the edge of the armrest, the floor, and even against the handle of Myra's bag. Every now and then, he turned to Adil with another question. Uncle, have you ever seen snow? Is it cold like ice cream? Did you ride horses? Did you go on a boat? Adil answered patiently, sometimes with a short smile, sometimes with a story. Each answer carried a piece of his past life, a life filled with travel, meetings, and experiences that once seemed normal but now felt distant. The boy's curiosity forced him to remember details he had not thought about in a long time: the smell of roasted chestnuts on a winter street, the sound of waves crashing against a rocky coast, the sight of lanterns glowing during a festival in Japan. As he spoke, Myra listened quietly. She could see how his eyes softened whenever he slipped into memory. For a few minutes, he looked less like a man trapped in silence and more like someone who had once lived fully. She admired the way he described things, with detail and care, as though he was painting pictures with words. But every time he finished a story, There was a pause, and in that pause, Myra saw something else. His eyes would darken, his voice would fade, and the shadow of sadness would return. It was as if the memories gave him joy for a heartbeat, only to remind him of what he had lost. At one point, Samir grew tired and leaned against Myra's arm, his eyelids heavy. Myra stroked his hair and turned her gaze to Adil. "He talks so much," she said softly, smiling. "I hope he hasn't troubled you." Adil shook his head gently. "Not at all. He reminds me of someone." His words slowed as he looked out the glass window again. Myra tilted her head. "Someone close." Adil hesitated. He had not shared this with anyone in months, not even his own family, who had tried to tiptoe around his pain. But for some reason, he felt he could speak here, in this corner of the airport, to a woman who listened without judgment. "My younger brother," Adil said at last. "When we were children, he asked questions the same way, endless, curious, never stopping. I used to tease him, saying he would never let the world rest because he wanted to know everything." Myra smiled softly. "And where is he now?" Adil's face grew distant. "He lives abroad with his family. We don't talk much anymore. Life, it pulled us in different directions. Even before the accident, we were not as close as we once were." And after, his voice trailed off, heavy with unspoken words. Myra did not push. She simply nodded, her expression gentle. She knew how relationships could change, how distance and silence could turn even the closest bonds fragile. Adil sighed. "It's strange. When you are busy, you think people will always be there, waiting. But when you stop, you realize time doesn't wait for anyone. Everyone keeps moving forward. And you sit still." His words struck Myra deeply. She thought of her own journey as a single mother, of the friends who had drifted away when life grew complicated. She thought of the loneliness she had often felt, trying to raise Samir with no one by her side. She understood more than she wanted to admit. For a while, they sat in silence, watching travelers hurry past. Myra adjusted Samir so he could sleep more comfortably on her lap. Adil kept his gaze on the boy, his chest tightening with an emotion he could not name. The child's trust, his laughter, his simple kindness, these things reminded Adil of what he once longed for but never had. "Your son," Adil said quietly, "he is a blessing. You must be proud." Myra looked down at Samir, her eyes softening. "I am. He gives me strength when I feel weak. He doesn't know it, but he saves me every day." Adil lowered his eyes, his fingers tightening on the armrest of his chair. "I wish," he stopped, his voice breaking slightly. "I wish I had given more time to family when I could. I thought success would fill the emptiness. But success doesn't hold your hand when you're alone." Myra felt her chest ache at his words. She wanted to say something, but she knew no words could erase the pain of regret. Instead, she let her silence become comfort. Sometimes, silence was the kindest answer. Adil stared out at the runway, where another plane lifted into the sky. He remembered his old life, stepping onto private jets, walking through airports with a team beside him, his phone buzzing with endless calls. And now, he sat quietly in a chair, with no one but strangers noticing him. The contrast cut deep. Yet as he looked at Myra and her son, something softened inside him. Perhaps fate had placed them here for a reason. Perhaps this meeting was not just chance, but a reminder that even in loss, there could still be connection. As Samir stirred in his sleep, Myra gently whispered, "Sometimes, we remember the past too much. But maybe life brings people to remind us that the present still matters." Adil turned his gaze to her. Her words sank into his heart, leaving a warmth he had not felt in a long time. For the first time since the accident, he felt that maybe, just maybe, the silence around him was beginning to break. The loudspeaker crackled again through the airport hall. A calm voice announced that several flights had been delayed because of weather conditions. Groans and sighs filled the space as passengers complained or rushed to the counters. For many, the delay was nothing but frustration. But for Adil, Myra, and little Samir, the delay felt strangely different. It gave them more time together. Time that Adil had not expected to want, yet now found himself grateful for. Samir, who had woken from his short nap, clapped his hands happily. "Mama, that means we don't have to go yet," he said with excitement, as if the delay were a gift instead of a problem. Myra smiled tiredly. "Yes, but it also means more waiting." Adil, watching the boy's joy, allowed himself a faint smile. "He seems to find good in everything." Myra turned her gaze to Adil. "Children see the world differently. They don't look at time the way we do. To them, every minute can still hold something new." Her words stayed in Adil's mind. He had spent so many months counting hours as empty, lifeless things. Perhaps he had forgotten how to see moments as children did, little chances for discovery. Samir tugged at Adil's sleeve. "Uncle, do you want to play a game with me while we wait?" Adil hesitated. "A game?" "Yes," Samir said with wide eyes. "It's called I Spy. I say, I spy with my little eye something, and you have to guess what it is." Adil had not played a game like that since he himself was a child. Yet the boy's eagerness made it hard to refuse. "All right," Adil said softly. "You start." Samir's eyes searched the room, then he grinned. "I spy with my little eye something, blue." Adil looked around. There were many blue things: the signs, the bags, even a woman's scarf. "Is it that man's suitcase?" he guessed. Samir giggled. "No." "Guess again." Myra laughed quietly as Adil tried a few more guesses before finally pointing to the airline staff's uniform. "There," he said. "Yes." Samir cheered, clapping his hands. "Now your turn." Adil thought carefully. It felt strange to play, but slowly, it warmed him. "I spy with my little eye something shining." Samir scanned the hall with determination. "The lights." "Too easy," Adil teased gently. "The windows." Samir guessed again. "No," Adil said, a faint smile appearing. Samir looked around, puzzled, then Myra pointed softly at the silver watch on Adil's wrist. Samir's face lit up. "The watch?" "Uncle, your watch is shining." Adil nodded, the small smile deepening. For a moment, the heaviness he carried seemed lighter. Myra observed quietly. She saw the change in Adil's face as he engaged with her son. The man who had once looked like a lonely statue now carried a spark of life in his eyes. After the game ended, Samir settled beside his mother, humming to himself. Myra turned to Adil. "I must say, you are very patient with him. Most people get tired after so many questions." Adil looked down at his hands. "I used to have patience. I lost it for a while. Maybe he's reminding me how to find it again." Myra's expression softened. "Sometimes children give us lessons without even trying." Adil nodded slowly. He could not deny it. As the minutes stretched on, Myra pulled out a small packet of food she had packed for the journey. Bread, fruit, and a few biscuits. She offered some to Samir, then turned toward Adil. "Would you like something? It's simple, but it's all I have." Adil looked at the food, then at her. He was not used to such offers. For months, people had given him things out of duty or pity, never out of kindness. He hesitated, but Myra's eyes held no judgment. Finally, he accepted a piece of fruit. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome," Myra replied. "Travel feels lighter when we share, even if it's just bread." They ate together in silence for a few minutes. The food was simple, Yet it tasted better than the finest dinners Adil had attended in the past. Perhaps because it carried something he had missed: human warmth. As they finished, Samir leaned against Adil's wheelchair, yawning. "Uncle, when the plane comes, will you sit near us?" Adil blinked at the question. He had grown used to being alone in every space, including airplanes. Yet hearing the boy's request touched him in ways he could not explain. He looked at Myra, who gave a small smile. "Maybe," Adil said softly. "If the seats allow." Samir beamed at the answer, satisfied. The delay stretched on, but instead of feeling restless, Adil felt something unfamiliar: comfort. Time passed not in emptiness, but in shared moments: laughter at a child's game, the taste of shared food, the quiet presence of people who asked nothing from him but honesty. As another announcement echoed through the hall, Adil realized something remarkable. He had entered the airport as a man invisible, drowning in loneliness. But because of a boy's innocent question and a mother's kind heart, the silence of his life had cracked open. And for the first time in a long while, Adil was not counting the hours. He was living them. The airport lights glowed softly as the evening stretched on. People around them grew restless with the delay: some pacing, some sighing, some complaining loudly. But in the quiet corner by the large window, Adil, Myra, and Samir sat together as though time had slowed for them alone. Adil found himself studying the faces of the mother and son beside him. Myra's face carried signs of tiredness, but there was also strength in her calm eyes. She held herself with quiet dignity, even though life had clearly tested her. Samir, on the other hand, was pure light: his laughter spilling freely, his questions unstoppable, his small hands always reaching for new things. Adil could not remember the last time he had felt this kind of warmth. For months, people had surrounded him with formality: doctors, assistants, and family who spoke to him with politeness but without depth. Yet here, in the simple company of strangers, he felt seen. Not as a CEO, not as a man in a wheelchair, but simply as himself. Samir, who had grown restless again, leaned against the armrest of Adil's chair. "Uncle," he said, "do you ever feel sad?" The question struck deep. Myra quickly touched her son's arm, embarrassed. "Samir," but Adil raised a hand gently. "It's all right." He looked down at the boy and gave a faint smile. "Yes. I feel sad sometimes." Samir tilted his head, his eyes wide. "But why?" Adil took a slow breath. His first instinct was to hide behind simple answers. But something about the child's open face made him want to be honest. "Because, life changed for me. I used to walk, to travel, to do many things without help. Then one day, an accident happened, and now I cannot walk anymore. It made me feel like I lost a part of myself." Samir's small hand reached out and touched the wheel of the chair. "But you can still move. You can still talk. You can still smile." Adil's chest tightened at the boy's words. They were so simple, yet so true. He had been measuring his life by what he had lost, not by what he still had. Myra's eyes softened as she watched the moment. "Children see with a clear heart," she said gently. "They don't focus on what's missing. They see what is still there." Adil looked at her, his throat tightening. "It's strange," he whispered, "that a child can see what I could not. For so long, I thought my life was finished. But maybe it is only different now." Myra nodded. "Different does not mean less. Sometimes, it means a new way to be strong." Her words echoed in his heart. He thought back to his past: the endless meetings, the long hours chasing success, the pride he had carried. None of it had prepared him for the silence that came after his accident. Yet in this quiet, he was discovering something he had ignored before: the value of simple connection. Samir suddenly pointed toward the window where a plane was lifting into the sky. "Look. It's flying." "Mama, Uncle, Look. The three of them turned to watch. The airplane rose higher and higher, its lights blinking against the darkening sky. For Samir, it was pure excitement. For Adil, it was something deeper. He remembered his own words earlier, how flying felt like freedom. Watching the plane, he realized something: freedom was not only about walking or traveling. Freedom was about allowing his heart to open again, about choosing to live even when life had changed. He whispered softly, almost to himself, maybe I can still fly, even if not in the same way as before. Myra heard him. She smiled gently. Yes, you can. Flying is not only with wings. It is with hope. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, but it was not heavy. It was peaceful. Adil felt something inside him shift, like a door opening that had been locked for months. Samir, unaware of the depth of the moment, tugged at Adil's hand. Uncle, when we reach our city, will you come visit us? Mama makes good food. You won't be alone. Myra's cheeks warmed at her son's sudden invitation. Samir, she whispered, don't trouble him. But Adil shook his head, his voice soft but steady. No. He's not troubling me. He's giving me something I thought I lost. Myra tilted her head. And what is that? Adil met her eyes. For the first time, his voice carried not just sadness, but strength. Connection. A reason to look forward again. Myra's gaze softened. She did not answer, but her eyes spoke enough. She understood. She, too, knew what it felt like to carry loneliness and then find unexpected comfort in a stranger's kindness. The announcement board flickered again, reminding them that flights would soon resume. Passengers around them began to prepare, yet Adil remained still, as if savoring the last few minutes of this unexpected meeting. In that moment, he realized something life-changing: healing did not always come from medicine or wealth. Sometimes, it came from the laughter of a child and the gentle words of someone who cared enough to sit beside him. And for the first time in a long time, Adil felt hope not as a memory but as a living thing inside his heart. The airport finally came alive with new energy as the announcement echoed through the halls: flights were ready to board again. People gathered their belongings, relief showing on their faces. Suitcases rolled, children tugged at parents, and voices rose with excitement. But in the quiet corner near the large glass window, Adil did not move right away. His heart was still heavy with the weight of the realization he had just experienced. The world around him was rushing forward, but for him, time still lingered in that small space where kindness had been shared. Myra stood up and helped Samir with his small backpack. Come on, Samir, she said softly. We need to get ready. Samir looked up at Adil with innocent eyes. Uncle, are you coming too? Adil nodded slowly. Yes, my flight is also ready. His voice was calm, but inside he felt a strange ache. He did not want this moment to end. For so long, he had been alone, and now, after only a few hours, he felt like he had known Myra and Samir for much longer. Myra hesitated, then looked at Adil with gentle concern. Do you need help getting to your gate? Adil paused. In the past, he would have quickly said no, not wanting anyone to see his weakness. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he realized that accepting help was not shameful. It was a way to connect. Yes, he said finally, his voice soft but sure. I would like that. Myra gave a small smile and adjusted her bag. Then let's go together. Samir walked beside Adil's wheelchair, one hand resting on its frame as if guiding him, even though Adil was perfectly capable of moving it himself. The boy's touch, however, brought warmth. It made Adil feel less like a man who had lost something, and more like someone still part of the world. As they moved through the busy hall, people passed quickly around them, but Adil did not mind the stares anymore. For once, he did not feel invisible. He felt part of something real. When they reached the point where their gates separated, a quiet heaviness settled over them. Myra turned to him. "This is where we say goodbye, I think." Adil looked at her, then at Samir. He wanted to speak, but words felt stuck in his throat. He had faced boardrooms full of powerful men and spoken with confidence, yet here he struggled to express something so simple: gratitude. It was Samir who broke the silence. He tugged at Adil's sleeve. "Uncle, don't be sad. We will meet again, right?" Adil leaned slightly closer to the boy. "Yes," he whispered. "We will." Myra placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "We don't know when, Samir." But her eyes met Adil's, and there was something unspoken in them, an understanding that perhaps fate was not finished weaving their paths together. Adil reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small business card. He held it toward Myra. "This has my number," he said gently. "Not because of business. But, if you ever need anything, or even if you just want to talk, please call." Myra hesitated, then accepted the card. Her fingers brushed his hand briefly, and in that touch there was an honesty that words could not carry. "Thank you," she said softly. Samir grinned. "Mama, now Uncle is our friend." Adil chuckled quietly. "Yes, I am." A boarding call echoed for Myra's flight. She turned, adjusting Samir's backpack one last time. "We should go." Adil watched as they began walking away. Samir waved enthusiastically, his small hand high in the air. "Bye, Uncle. Don't forget us." Adil lifted his hand in return. "I won't," he whispered, though they were already moving into the crowd. For a moment, he sat alone again. But this time, the loneliness did not cut so deeply. His heart was full of something it had not carried in a long time: hope. When his own flight was called, an assistant came to offer help, but Adil surprised himself by saying, "No, thank you. I can manage." He moved forward on his own, his chair gliding smoothly toward the gate. As he traveled down the jet bridge, he thought about the boys' laughter, the kindness in Myra's eyes, and the words they had shared. They had entered his life like a passing breeze, yet left behind a lasting warmth. Inside the plane, he settled near the window. The engines roared, and soon the aircraft lifted into the night sky. Adil looked out as the city lights grew smaller below. And in that moment, he realized something important. Life would not always give him control. There would be struggles, there would be losses. But there would also be chances, small moments of kindness, unexpected friendships, and new beginnings. He whispered to himself, as the plane soared higher, "I'm not alone anymore." For the first time since his accident, Adil allowed himself to close his eyes, not with fear of what was gone, but with peace for what might still come.